Welcome to the Shoot Off. I'm your host, Bernardo Oliveira, Brazilian Olympic archer, and here every 2 weeks... Yeah, huge delay for this episode. I want to apologize. My routine has been totally messy these days. Lots of changes going on and all. I'll try my best to stick to the 2-week interval between episodes. The whole podcasting endeavor has been a tremendous learning experience for me. However, there's still lots to improve, including all the planning necessary for each episode. But the Olympic Games are starting at the end of this week. As I said before, I'd be bringing special content about the Olympics, and today's episode is part of it. A chat with an Olympic champion. And tomorrow, July 24th, I'm releasing a Paris 2024 archery preview episode, bringing you the most important talking points ahead of the games, so you're up to date and up to speed once arrows start flying at the Esplanade des Invalides in Paris. Stay tuned for that one. Now it's time to check our inbox. In case you want to jump straight into the episode, you can skip to
5 minutes and 40 seconds.
And now let's get to today's messages. Adrian from Puerto Rico wrote to me in Spanish, so I will translate as we go. He wrote, "Hello Bernardo, I hope you're doing well." "Thank you, I'm doing super well, thanks a lot. I dare write to you..." Oh, come on. No need to use that sort of language, anyone can write to me. "I dare write to you because I've seen that you've been training at the World Archery Excellence Center in Switzerland. I've seen lots of good stuff about the place, and I'm seeking more information on how to train there, how to use the facilities, and everything. So yeah, I've been training here for about 2 years now. It's an amazing place, and what's even more exciting is because so many changes have been going on for the better, even though it's a state-of-the-art training center facility, let's say, there is still a lot to improve, to change, and this is exactly what's been going on with the recent arrival of world-renowned coach Marc Dellenbach. He was the head coach for the French national team for about 10 years or more even. Then he had a very successful spell with the German team, and now he's here. So he is definitely a pushing and driving force, and he's been really pushing for all the things that need to improve. The place itself is amazing, and we want to make it even better. So yeah, it's got a 70-meter indoor hall. You can shoot 70 meters indoors whenever you want, all year long. It's really good for tuning, really good in winter time as well. It's got, of course, an awesome outdoor range. The good thing about the outdoor range is that sometimes it can be super quiet in terms of wind, and sometimes the wind is like crazy, so we do get all sorts of scenarios here. There is an amazing gym with like super new and diverse equipment. Also, there's a sauna, which is awesome for recovery. Also, there is an equipment repair room. There are so many tools for working on tuning, for setting up your equipment. It's a very central location in Western Europe, so it's really easy to get to so many places in the western part of Europe as well. And lastly, it's just really convenient that we can keep our bows at the storage, and so you don't have to pack it and set it up every time you come to train. So yeah, you and anyone else is more than welcome. This place is open to anyone who shoots archery. It's open for amateurs and elite archers alike. It's really a place for people of all levels. Everyone is welcome, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing all of you here anytime soon. Marina from Brazil, my home country, Brazil. She got in touch to say that she loved the last episode with Sergio Pani, that it was really cool, she said, to hear from someone who is a coach, so not just an athlete, even though he is a former athlete. So she loved the conversation with him, and also this makes me really happy. She said that she really liked because it was a relaxed conversation, so not this square, formal thing. And she just really enjoyed it, and she got in touch to say that she really liked the episode. And this makes me really happy because this is one of my goals with the podcast, is to have relaxed and chilled and funny, when possible, conversations with the people who make our sport. I really want to make it more human and make something that feels closer to the audience. So, yes, thank you so much, Marina. Muito obrigado for reaching out and saying that you liked the episode. It helps me continue. So, yes, thank you very much. Let's do something. We're gonna daydream together here. You practice a sport you love, and it happens to be an Olympic sport. You dream about making it to the games, and you eventually get there. That's great. Okay, let's make that a little bit more special. Olympics on home soil. Awesome. Tons of support everywhere. The most important competition of your life taking place in a familiar environment. Now allow me to take it even further. In front of your home crowd, you display your best performance and win gold. Well, this fairy tale kind of achievement is exactly what Simon Fairweather did in Sydney 2000. Simon won the World Championships in 1991, but the years that followed didn't bring the results he had hoped for. Especially after winning such an important title, expectations were high on him, perhaps too high. But he turned the tide in spectacular fashion, winning the Olympic Games in front of a scintillating Australian crowd. Come with me as we get to know better a man who's so much more than a world and Olympic champion. We talk about his 2 major titles and the 9-year gap in between, his time under Coach Kisickley, how jewelry making influenced his Fairweather tabs, and much more. Simon Fairweather, it's a pleasure to talk to you once again. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation and coming to the Shoot Off Archery podcast. Welcome, and how have you been doing?
Pretty good. We've been pretty busy. It's only a couple of weeks before the games, and my wife and I are actually travelling across to do a bit of work for World Archery. So things have been busy trying to wrap up orders and things for Fairweather Archery in time, and also doing our own shooting, because both of us are heading off a month after we get back from Paris to Canada for the World Field Champs, both shooting barebow. So it's been, between those things, it's been pretty busy.
Wow, super cool. So super exciting. You've already touched on some things that I wanted to ask you. And so, of course, when I first thought about this podcast project, which is somewhat recent, one of the first people I thought of interviewing, of course, was you, because I believe you have so much to share and so many interesting stories. But I really wanted to have this episode with you, as it's the last episode before the Olympic Games. And I heard that you were going to be doing some things in Paris on site. And also, can you share with us what you're going to be doing, what you're up to there?
Well, actually, I'm a little bit uncertain myself as to what the tasks and schedule will be. I know I've got to be there, and we have our flights booked. But exactly what I'm doing, I'm not really sure. I think some of it is World Archery has some like sponsors experience sessions, so that some of the big sponsors for World Archery and for the Olympic Committee can come and see archery, and they need somebody to show them around. So that's one of the jobs I believe I'm doing. And then I think a session on the wrap-up show, the recorded one. So as an expert.
I guess whoever will be watching can trust your judgment on that. I guess you know the trade.
I'm sure there'll be some that think it is and isn't. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you done this in other editions of the games, or this is new?
Not of that show. I've done a little bit of sort of joint commentary, but not a lot. Obviously, we haven't been around much for some some years. We're a long way from where the action is here. So I guess there was a trip to Berlin a few years ago that I did a short session with Karim on that one, but yeah, not a lot.
That's really exciting. When I heard that you were going to be there doing something, I thought it was just genius. And yeah, I'm excited to see what content will come out of it with you and all. And I think it's really cool to have ambassadors for our sport, such as yourself, So as you said, like with VIPs, sponsors, and everything. So
yeah, that should be interesting.
Yeah, and maybe you talk about this all the time, but of course I wanna pick your brains on this as well, which is Sydney 2000. Like very few athletes get to compete at the games in the first place on home soil. I did so, and it was amazing. And even less people get to win gold, and you did just that. And now, as we're coming to the Paris Olympics, a lot of attention is on a French team. They are a strong team. They are Rio medal contenders. And when I was going through researching before our talk and looking at interviews with you and everything, something that I found really interesting was a lot of the times people talk about the home games with a lot of pressure. And I felt that. But you said that actually you felt more relaxed and everything just felt, I don't know, easier. I think you even said it just felt easier. How was it for you?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Personally, my struggle was always the beginning of the competition, like the first rounds. I had a bit of a history of doing really well or losing very early on in the event. And so the previous two Olympics that I'd gone to that had been match play, because the very first Olympics I went to in Seoul, it wasn't match play, it was a grand feeder round. So it was quite a different dynamic. And, at that event, because I was fresh out of being a junior, I was, like many juniors are, optimistic and hopeful of the future, but not feeling too much pressure at that Olympics because you think my best years are ahead of me. I don't have to win this time. I just have to learn, and try and get better in the future. So that Olympics, I think I came 16th in Seoul. I was reasonably happy with that. I mean, we would have liked to do better, but 16 was okay for the first time around. But then before the next Olympics, I'd won a world championships. And so I went into Barcelona as the world champion, and I felt a lot of pressure there. And that was the year that they brought in match play for the first time. And I remember shooting the very first match that I shot internationally was the Arizona Cup, I think in 92. And it was the first time I really felt nerves, like more than just a bit of normal nervousness. I actually felt really quite nervous. And I don't remember whether I lost the first match there that I shot or the next one, but it didn't go as planned. And that kind of set the tone going forward. At a number of subsequent events before that 92 Olympics, I lost early on, and you feel the embarrassment of losing and the pressure of doing well, and it's just a very negative spiral. And so for Sydney, having had what seemed to me like a very long period of bad results due to these damn matches, the last thing I wanted to do was lose early in Sydney. So that was sort of the big thing in my mind was getting through until the later matches. I didn't really know how it would turn out. I just was desperate not to exit early. So once I got through those rounds, it progressively got less stressful because with every round I got through, the result was relatively better, and I became more comfortable with the idea that if I lost now, that would be okay. I'd still want to go further if I can, but this is not a disaster. And so it got less of a disaster with every round until suddenly I, found I was in the matches, in the final matches. Then I guess the dynamic changed a little, like thinking now it's about winning the matches for the bonus of winning medals, not just putting in a good showing. But coming back to your question, being a home event, as you would have no doubt experienced, the media in your country when it's a home Olympics are very focused on results. And so it doesn't really matter whether your country has historically results at the Olympic level. Because it's a home Olympics, the media are only really interested in seeing medal performances. And so everything is based around scrutiny of, are you going to perform versus how much money we're spending on putting you in the position to attempt to win a medal. So yeah, there was a lot of pressure going into the games.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is something I think it's probably one of my favorite anecdotes I've ever heard in archery. It's something you said, that the day of the Olympic final, it's a staring competition, and in Sydney, you were the one who didn't blink.
Yeah.
And so I find it fascinating because in many competitions, I felt this, that it's like the tiniest margins, they end up making the difference. Because in the end, like in the quarterfinals at the Olympics, maybe even the round of 16, everyone there could win if it's their day. So you came into what maybe we could say was the most important day in your archery career, that day in September, I believe, in 2000. You were world champion in 91. So I believe that part of you believed and thought that you could win gold. Can you take us through that day? How was it like, I don't know, going to bed the night before? What were you thinking that day? And how did you go about it?
Yeah. The night before is always an interesting one, isn't it? You do the right things, you go to bed early and all that kind of stuff, and then you're lying there thinking about what's tomorrow going to bring. Am I going to sleep well? Am I going to wake up well? And what's going to unfold? You've done all the right things to get there, but that doesn't mean it's going to turn out the way you dream it will. I mean, as you say, there's 32 people who all have done a lot of work to try and realize their dream. And arguably, maybe 8 or 16 of them have all potentially got it in them to put together enough good arrows to win. Just as the people who are favourites, who can put together enough arrows to win, may not do so at that crucial moment. I think the thing about Olympics, that people who perhaps haven't got experience in being involved in a Olympic preparation, whether you're an athlete or a coach or a technician, there's so much going on at an Olympics that's not happening at a World Championships. So many possibilities of things happening that are like cornerstone moments of the thing that stopped the good performance. Whether it's something somebody says to you offhand that just lodges in your mind and you don't shake it and it plants the seed of doubt. Whether it's you don't catch your bus, like there's millions of different things that could get in the way of that perfect result, given that there's a whole bunch of other people who are also trying to put together their perfect preparation. Like it's not like it's just you and 2 other people and everybody else doesn't count. There's a whole bunch of people who have done a lot of work, and a lot of distractions, I guess. There's a lot more media scrutiny. There's a lot more people talking to you about, how you're going to go, and for the stars to align for that one person on that one day as they've planned, the odds are very small, I think, even for favourites.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think you managed to be successful in that?
I kind of feel like for a lot of instances, as we were saying, it's the person who doesn't blink. Either they don't have some bad luck happen, that they just shoot their normal good arrows when they needed them. Everybody else who doesn't end up in the final match typically is someone who shot some arrows that they would not normally shoot, standard-wise. If I look at my matches in Sydney, there were no bad ones, no bad matches, very few bad shots. None of them were amazingly record-breaking. I didn't shoot any 119s out of 120 or something like that. None of the 30-30-30s that you see at World Cups and stuff currently. But most of the arrows stayed in the gold, where my opponents put one in the red. And also the matches we were shooting in Sydney were not sets. They were accumulation scores. So, if you shot one bad arrow, now you've got to either hope your opponent shoots a bad arrow or you've got to shoot a whole bunch of 10s to get in front again. So it really was a mission of consistency and not making mistakes rather than blisteringly good scores. And I feel like I was the one person on that day that managed to do that. I just didn't make mistakes, which was unusual for me in that period.
But as you said yourself, 88 Seoul Olympics, you were a junior, so young, and then not long after that, you become world champion.
Yeah.
And so I even read an article where you were saying that like this early success that you had perhaps poised you to really be expecting great stuff early on. And then it just felt that, if you won gold, it was kind of expected. If you didn't, that was a failure. So not really a healthy place to be in, a healthy mindset. And so the Sydney Olympics, they happened 9 years after you won the world title. Do you think that this was kind of like, I don't know, it was enough of a buffer for you to just come to Sydney thinking that you can, but you don't really have that high expectation and pressure?
Yeah, to some extent. That 9 years felt like an eternity. I mean, looking back on it now, 9 years isn't too long a stretch. But at the time, it seemed like decades and a lot of disappointments in that period. But, I mean, one of the things that I am privately really proud of was, as far as I know, no one else has won two majors, if we call them majors, or world championships and an Olympics, or two world championships or whatever, in two different competition formats. Like my world championships was in grand feeders. So that's, for those who don't know, that's you shoot passes, with a cut. The bottom few competitors of each cut get cut out, and then the score starts from zero again. But it was 9 arrows at each of the 4 feeder distances in ends of 3. So 3 ends of 3, 4 distances, and then you'd cut the bottom competitors. So a different mindset. It was basically just make sure you keep shooting good arrows. You don't have to be first. You just have to not be last. So I remember when, in the year or two after my world championships win, a few people were saying, he's just a grand feeder specialist. And I guess to some extent I had trained specifically for that round, just in terms of the mindset, like keeping good arrows all the time, not shooting a mistake, but not necessarily gunning 30s in an end. It's just don't be last. Keep good arrows going down to the target until the final 8, and then you go for it. Mm-hmm. So then to have to change my mindset for matches, which were quite a different scenario and much higher pressure and dictated by your opponent to some extent, because, you were either first or last in a match. So you couldn't have the same approach. So it sort of, I guess, it took quite a long time to accept that matches were here to stay. And if I was going to get a good result, it was going to have to be in the format of matches, not in rounds of yesteryear. So it took quite a while, I guess, to get over the disappointments of 92, but also rebuild my attitude and, I guess, expectations for Sydney. But, we had a very different support network for Sydney than the previous previous events. It was the first time we'd had a national training program, first time we'd had a full-time national coach. Everything was quite different. So I guess if I compare Sydney to the previous 2 Olympics, Atlanta and Barcelona, our squad and certainly my own approach for Sydney was much more thorough. And really, if I look at the fact that Sydney got the result I was after, there was no wonder that I didn't get the result I was after in the previous ones, given the differences of preparation.
Yeah, you mentioned you had a full-time national team coach. That was Kisikli.
Yeah.
I don't know how renowned and how famous he was back then, but today, he is one of the biggest names in coaching and archery.
Yeah.
Would you say that he helped you change in the terms of the mindset as well? He helped you prepare for match play?
Yes, I think that's probably the most important thing, that he structured our training program so that we did a lot of match play practice. You can sort of look at, what we did with technique and trying to change the way we shot and so on, but to some extent, I don't feel like that was the key. The key for the performance was the competition preparation, where we would shoot matches within our squad twice a week. So on the matches in Sydney, the elimination rounds were 18 arrow matches, and the last 3 matches, the final matches, were 12 arrow matches. So on Wednesdays, we would shoot, I think they were, I can't remember which way, Wednesdays and Fridays, we'd shoot elimination matches on one of them and final matches on the other within the squad. And we're all mixed together, women and men. The women would get a couple of points head start in the score just to sort of level it. And that was sort of adjusted depending on whether the women were doing relatively better or worse than the men. So the main goal was not so much attributing a certain handicap to one side or the other. It was just making sure that the competitions were quite even, so that it didn't matter who we were shooting against, we had to shoot our best to win. And I found that really, really valuable, comparing it to the preparations I'd ever had before that, where, you can imagine what it's going to be like to shoot a match, and you can pretend, you're like pulling scores out of a hat, and saying, okay, I have to shoot a 10 on this arrow because my opponent shot a 9 or whatever. Actually shooting a match, standing on the line, having the routine of the match playing out over and over. Even things like, the timing equipment breaking and having to stay in the right headspace so that when it's ready to go again, you were still running hot. instead of distracted, and that kind of stuff. It was so valuable, so valuable. And, like you see now, I only this week, I don't know if you saw that, I think it was on Instagram, the post where they were sharing the Koreans shooting on their Paris finals field that they've set up in Korea. So it looks like Paris, and everything will, apart from having other countries there, everything feels like they're shooting at the Olympics for every practice session they do. So, why we all don't do that, I don't know. I guess to some extent it's budget, but so valuable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it's super interesting to hear you say all of that. And now it's like already for 10, 20 years, it's fairly common to see Korean coaches in other countries. But I guess basically in Australia was kind of one of the first times that this was happening, kind of bringing a foreign coach and everything. And this really set him up for the success he's had worldwide. From Australia, he went to the United States and everything he achieved there. Yeah. How did you guys feel like having, a Korean coach that might have a different approach? Like, how was this? Because I believe it was one of the first times worldwide, something that is so common nowadays. But how was this? What I believe was the first time for you guys.
It was difficult, to start with. Key 6 English was okay, but a bit limited. And also we had to sort of learn to understand what he was saying with his limited, vocabulary at that stage. And, archery is a very difficult thing to describe at the top level, so the subtleties that you're trying to explain to someone as a coach is difficult even in your own language. So I guess having to do that with any language barrier is very difficult. But we felt very buoyed at having such a great coach. We understood that he was, the previous head coach in Korea. And so, in theory, we've got the best coach in the world just by, the reputation. So I guess in terms of turning up to the Olympics, at the end of our preparation, we knew that at least we weren't going to turn up feeling like we didn't have a great coach. So we've got the great coach. We've had a full-time program. We've been training all the time. We've looked at our techniques. We've been working with our fitness. We were ticking lots of boxes. So having a top coach made us feel like at least that area we weren't lacking in. Really, I guess the thing that we were most worried about as a team, I think, or perhaps individually even, was just not having enough time. We had that program with Kusik for about 18 months before Sydney. So it wasn't years and years that we were working with him. So it was very intensive, but relatively short. And I guess personally, I felt that time pressure constantly, even from the beginning of the program. You had that thought of, I know where I need to be a contender for the gold medal, and I know where I am now. What's going to change between now and then that's going to bring me from where I feel like I am now to where I expect I need to be at the deadline? And, as the months got less and then the weeks got less, I think, it's very hard not to feel like you've run out of time too soon, and you're just going to have to go with what you've got. And I guess that's probably pretty normal for most people, but you feel it keenly when it's, you're in the situation.
Wow. So that was a very short preparation, like, the full-on preparation ahead of Sydney. That's crazy. I thought you guys had more time, like, I don't know, a couple of years at least.
Well, I think the men's program started maybe 2 years out. I joined it 6 months late because of university requirements. And I think actually the women's program, now that I remember, they actually started a bit earlier than that as well. So they might have had 2.5 years. But it still felt a very short amount of time. And also you've got to remember that we were coming from a situation where we hadn't had a national coach ever. Like people had just been self-trained at their homes. That we had a coach that would be selected for a given event, but, that's really just a caretaker role. That's not a coach that works with you on a regular basis. And there's pretty limited amounts of stuff a coach can give to an athlete when they don't work with them on a regular basis or have never worked with them. So, we were going from very, very amateur backgrounds to suddenly coming into what we, think of now as the modern era, where you have national training programs and national coaches that work with athletes all the time. So, we had to come up to speed pretty quickly.
Yeah, I guess so much has changed, right? In so many aspects in archery from back then to to now, like 30 years on. Like for example, I believe back then there were way less competitions than we have today. Like we have now the World Cup stages and continental competitions and everything.
That's right. Yeah, you've got the World Cup circuit now. That wasn't around when we were preparing for Sydney. We travelled to some of the European Grand Prix. That was the closest we got to that kind of thing. But to travel to Europe to shoot those from countries like Australia or New Zealand or the fringe islands in terms of location, it's really expensive and really time consuming. So jet lag's always a problem, and budget too. Like not many teams can afford to say, well, there's another World Cup in 3 weeks' time, so I guess we'll just stay here and train because it's too hard to go back and forwards. Now you've got to not only be able to afford your programs, it has to afford the accommodation and the training facilities and all of that kind of stuff while you're in Europe or North America or wherever you happen to be. But also if the athletes work, as many athletes around the world still do, it means you have to take time off work and risk losing your job. And so it's very difficult. I'm not sure how many of the athletes these days do have jobs, actually, now that I say that. But back then, certainly for our program for Sydney, it was expected that people who are going to be training in that program would have to stop other work, stop studying, stop working. This is a full-time program. Yeah, but it's difficult. Mm-hmm. Coming from so far away.
Yeah. Once I heard Ryan Tyack saying that, like, actually he was looking at the bright side of being from Australia, which is you guys are just used to every trip being super long. And also it's kind of like while other teams, they might be complaining about, oh, this one is particularly long and fatiguing. It's kind of like you guys are just used to it, because if you want to go from Australia to anywhere, it's like at least a 10-hour flight. So
I don't know whether being used to it equals being able to manage it necessarily. It's familiar, but it doesn't help, so.
Yeah.
I think I'd still rather be one of the complaining Europeans.
Well, just mentioning that Australia is far, but I've never been there, sadly, and I'd love to go because I hear amazing stuff about Australia. But the budget and the time is a barrier for me as of yet. But
also, the time of year, it doesn't help, So, where I live up in the Adelaide Hills in South Australia, it's mostly single-digit weather at the moment. So, today, for instance, we couldn't see the back fence of our property. We're in the clouds. It's raining or drizzling, and it's, I don't know, about 8 degrees or something like that. It's not like Northern Hemisphere winters with snow, but then the Northern Hemisphere archers are not preparing for the Olympics in winter. They're not training in snow. They have that as an off season, So when we are trying to prepare for World Championships or Olympics, it's winter. We're shooting and it's as I say, it's not frozen, but it's not pleasant.
Yeah, challenging at least. Where I come from in Brazil, it's not like that. It's our winter season, but it's just a little bit colder. But I guess it's the same for people like from Argentina or Chile, where it can get pretty chilly, and it makes it outdoor shooting can be quite uncomfortable, at least, especially in the morning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and they're looking for like big indoor facilities to try and prepare, or having to have training camps elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, and then once again, it's it's a cost. So it's a double-edged sword. I mean, I think the Australian Indoor Championships were held last weekend, which is basically like a postal shoot. It's not all in one area because it's too far for everybody to travel just for an indoor event. So because it's indoor, you get away from having to worry about some of the weather conditions. So it is a postal event, but there's sort of no point for us shooting indoor, because if you're competitive internationally, that is, because in summer here you want to shoot outside, and in winter here we're preparing for the Northern Hemisphere outside. So it's basically outdoors all the time.
Yeah, just like in Brazil,
one way or the other.
Yeah. Now going back to after the Sydney success, you stopped in 2001, but made a comeback for 2004, and then after that you quit competitive archery, or at least for the moment. And so we've talked a lot about the pressure and how you were seeing things like kind of in a binary way, either like you were high up and won, or it was a failure. But then I believe that more recently, as you've made some comebacks into archery, you're finding it more pleasurable and just seeing it in a, I don't know, more laid back way. Like how's it going for you? How do you see it? Being someone who really had amazing success, as you said, like in Grand Prix, match play, world championships, Olympics and all. How do you see yourself now, the frame of mind you have now, just shooting for pleasure and all? What is the mind of an Olympic champion thinking about just shooting for pleasure these past few years?
Often conflicted. Like you're right. There's no reason to feel much pressure because I'm not trying to be the Olympic champion anymore. But once you're in that mindset, it's hard to get rid of it. It's hard not to get wrapped up in the process of problem solving your technique and trying to work out ways to shoot a bow better. So the last few years I've been shooting again, but in the bare bow division, because we make finger tabs, and when we designed the bare bow finger tab, we wanted to understand what it was that you need in a bare bow finger tab. So we thought we better learn how to shoot bare bow. So, and I was always a bit curious about this witchcraft that was bare bow shooting. And I've actually found learning to shoot bare bow very interesting and a lot of fun. But I still get sucked into that mindset of wanting to keep shooting and try and solve today's riddle of, what do I need to do with this part of my shooting or that part of my shooting? Like I might go down to the back of our yard where we have a target and say, I'll just go down for an hour and do a bit of shooting. And then I'm starting to look at my watch and going, I should go and do some work, but just another end, just a bit longer, It's feeling good. I think I'm solving something here. I miss being able to just shoot all day, every day. A simple life like that really suited my personality, I guess, where, not multitasking. I like to do the one thing with all of my attention. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I struggled to just shoot for fun and not to try and perform. So, and it's getting back to being more like that too. As I said, where my wife and I are in the team to shoot World Field this year, and I've been shooting really quite well. And my mind runs away with, okay, how do I shoot better and better and perform well in Canada, and how do I tick all the boxes, and rather than just go and say, oh well, we just shoot some arrows and see what happens. About the closest I've ever done to that was 2016 World Field. We both shot recurve and did very, very little preparation for that. We just shot a little bit of blank target, and because it was winter once again, a bit of blank target a few times a week, and turned up and had fun. And I still shot much better than I expected, probably because I was more relaxed than usual, and recurve was something I know well. So we had a good time and it was relaxed. I'm not sure where things are heading for Canada in terms of being relaxed versus being focused. I suspect more focus based.
Yeah, I believe it's kind of like second nature, right? This performance mindset. Whenever you start shooting, it's kind of like, just want to improve all the time and do this better and that, and then it goes on. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you mentioned the tabs. And if anyone hasn't connected the dots yet, so like Simon Fairweather Archery, yeah, you're the guy behind it all. And how did the idea come about of like making tabs? Because if you're gonna make a piece of equipment, I don't know, I guess people would think of other things to do, but then you create this tab, and the design is super simple. I'm shooting one that, like, I was very honored to get it from your hands at the Paris World Cup last year. I was like super excited. I was telling everyone, like, man, I got a Fairweather tab from Simon himself, and I love it. It's ultra simple and comfortable and all. I've been shooting it for almost a year now. So how did the idea of a tab come from, and the whole design and the thought process and all?
Well, there was two things that happened, I guess, that coincided when I designed the tab. One was I started to do a bit of shooting again in 2014 and spent most of that year shooting regularly. And I was using another commercial tab, and like many tabs that are on the market, it had a lot of screws in it. And it always used to drive me crazy how the screws would always slowly work loose, and you'd lose a screw, and to change the leather you needed to take all of the screws out, and then the finger spacer kept coming loose, and I could never get it back into the same place. And there was a bunch of things that really drove me crazy about finger tabs over the years. So they're uncomfortable or coming loose. And along with that, I went to university after, so before Sydney, I'd just done a degree in jewelry design. And it was less about making the jewellery and more about the design process, but focused on jewellery making. And like many of the graduates from that course, I didn't really end up in that field. It's pretty tough to make a living out of making jewellery or art or craft, those sorts of things. You put a lot of time into it and a lot of thinking and a lot of energy, and people don't always want to spend the money to buy something that is not necessarily an essential item. So it's difficult to make a go in those fields. But what I learnt doing the course was the process of design. And the last piece of the puzzle was I was always fascinated by the idea of the archery thumb rings. I didn't know anything about them other than that, some of the Asian traditional archery used this thumb ring.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what it looked like or how it fit, but I kind of liked the idea of having a ring that I could wear just as decoration that was specifically an archery thumb ring. Turns out when I found out what they actually looked like, I thought, oh, well, it's not very appropriate to wear that as a daily ring. But it sort of also planted the seed of the idea of why couldn't you have your tab attached to your hand with a ring rather than a piece of manky old elastic that looks horrible and has to be replaced all the time. And so I'd been doing a bit of wood carving as well. So I'd been doing sort of sculptural pieces, and I became aware of, or I got focused on the mold making processes so that I could make copies of those wood carvings. So all of those things together sort of gave me both the process of being able to design a product, but knowledge of some of the materials and processes that I would need to create a finger tab that was not really from an engineering perspective, but more from a handmade, ergonomic, one-off kind of creation. So in fact, the original prototype for the tab, I made it in wood. It was carved out of European boxwood, and it's still quite, when I look at it, it's still quite a beautiful piece, because that particular wood is this amazing wood that has no texture on it. No, wood normally has a grain to it. You can feel the grain. This boxwood, it just polishes up like a piece of acrylic. It's incredible,
Wow.
but has this beautiful sort of buttery look to it. And which is why they use it for these little micro carvings. So I made the original prototype out of that wood and then took a mold of it, then copied it in plastic. And so we went on from there. But it meant that the shape of the tab is more of a shape that is easy to create when you work making it by hand rather than using machinery. And in fact, we've had to have it converted into CNC files so that we could have certain parts of it, like the new brass pro plates we make now are done on a CNC. And so, it took a guy I know quite a long time to make the CNC files for that, because it's not a shape that normally is used in that industry. Most engineering approaches are a flat piece of stock with a radius on it to take the corners off. And he had to approach it quite differently, and it turned out to be a lot harder than I imagined it would be for the CAD developer.
Okay. And was it hard convincing people to shoot it? Because now, like Mete, he won Tokyo Olympics with it, right? And you have so many great people. But was it challenging to get it going and convincing the top people to shoot with it?
We had a massive piece of good luck early on. The guy in Sydney who was helping me with the CAD, the first round of CAD development, was quite good friends online with Chef Vandenberg. And so Chef was still a junior at that stage, but was doing really well. And Jonathan, the guy that did the CAD work originally, said, I know this guy and he's really keen to try your tab. What do you think? Send him some samples. And so he started shooting very well with it straight away, which made a bit of an impact. But going on from that, we approached the promotion of it quite differently to most companies typically do. And perhaps I was lucky because of my connections, because of my past with top-level archers. Maybe they were more willing to give it a go without history of the tab doing well at a grassroots level. So we went straight to the top level and filtered back down to grassroots rather than the normal path of selling it at local stores and gradually filtering up to elite level. So it was quite a different method of promoting it. And in fact, even to this day, most of our promotion is really just, our promotion budget is spent on sponsoring top athletes rather than a lot of magazine articles or that kind of thing. We just went straight to sponsor. And in fact, we're quite top heavy. We have proportionally a lot more top archers using our tab than grassroots level archers, just hasn't had time, I guess, to filter down and through the shops and so on. And I suspect it doesn't help in a recurve world that a lot of shops are owned by compounders. It's not normally, and given that our company only makes finger tabs, so it's not like we're riding on the back of our sights and our stabilizers and all the other equipment. All we make is that target finger tab, the modulus tab, and the barebow tab, and that's it. I guess we're unusual on a number of fronts there.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I'd love to talk more in depth about so many of the things that we talked about, but let's stick to the time frame here. There are two other segments that I like to do on the show, and I'd like to go ahead to them. But just before that, just a quick question. So do you work with jewelry making, or like what's your job? It's only your tab enterprise? Like what do you do?
So we have a couple of parts of the tab outsourced. So we get the plates, the black parts of the plates. Tabs commercially injection molded because the machinery that's involved in that is huge and expensive. So given that all we do is these finger tabs and the market is quite small, it's out of our budget to do that. But everything else, my wife and I do. We have no employees. Mm-hmm. So apart from those few pieces that we farm out, we cut the leather, we fold the boxes. My wife makes all of those spaces. So every spacer you see on an athlete's hand at the top level or at the local archery club, she has made it. So we have a tiny little workshop attached to our garage. That's what we do. So everything from the designs on the boxes to the choices of how the packaging is done and contacting the people who create the packaging, and it's all done by my wife and me. So, and most of it by my wife, as some of our friends in archery land know. She does an amazing job at managing all of that stuff. Yeah, it's just the two of us, and we spend quite a lot of time working on that. And we don't mind. It's only a little business, but it's something we like to do, and we're proud of the product. We sat back, like you said, Mete won the last Olympics, and then again at World Championships, and with Marie winning the women's, to sit there in our lounge room watching the live feed, watching those top guys and gals win those events. We can see our product on their hands that's come from our little workshop here in the Adelaide Hills. It's very satisfying, and we're very proud of it.
Yeah, definition of family-owned and family-run business.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so the next segment of the show, it's something I really like to play with. It's Build the Perfect Archer. So I'm going to name a couple of aspects of the shot, and I want you to tell me who you think the best person you've ever seen on that specific aspect is. Can be current or past. So the first one is bow arm.
Bow arm's a very interesting thing. And having been learning to shoot barebow, it has really brought that into focus for me, in that for those archers and myself, I was one until I started shooting barebow, who have only ever shot recurve or compound with stabilizers. You don't realize just how much work those stabilizers are doing to negate the way you use your bow arm. So my feeling now is that the archer really is trying to replace, the shooting machine that we see, we see people use to, select arrows and all that kind of thing, where the machine is only acting to pull the bow back and release it, not steer it, not manipulate it per se to try and make it shoot better somehow. It's just not interfering with the bow. So I feel like, well, certainly for barebow, I know my best shots are ones where the bow moves forward and, as a right-handed archer, moves forward and then left. So I'm not stopping the forward motion of the bow. It's arcing forward and to the side eventually without trying to hold the bow central through the shot, through the release. And the reason I feel that's very important, and it shows up with barebow, is if you start to try and hold the bow still in space so that it's still, in theory, still aiming at the middle of the target, as it were, as you complete the back half of the shot, it means you've got to use different muscles to hold it there than what you were using to expand through the clicker. So you're stopping doing one action and replacing it with another. So stabilizers do a lot to mask that if you are trying to stop the explosion of the bow forward. But it's still happening to a lesser extent. So I always really liked the way that Jay Bars released an arrow. His bow did exactly what I described, moved forward and then arced away. certainly in the period where I shot my best recurve shooting, it was happening like that. So otherwise, in the modern era, Kim Woo-jin, obviously, his bow arm it's beautiful. Just the way he shoots the bow is beautiful. So he really doesn't manipulate it or corrupt it in any way. It's very simple and it's less dynamic than what Jay's would have been, but very sound.
Such an interesting take on this. As you were talking about this, it really reminded me of a little lecture I saw given by Dick Tone, who coached Jay Bars, and the whole principle behind it. It's when I heard it, to me, it was pretty mind-blowing and so interesting. So really, really interesting to get your take on that as well. And I just forgot to mention that
very different approach, isn't it? The way that Dick teaches shooting is quite a different take than a lot of the sort of modern semi-Korean method of, the bow spinning in one space. And I feel like a lot of those Korean shooters get away with the way they do it just because of the repetitions that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to manage it so well because they've shot so many arrows. But there's certain aspects about it that I question at times.
Yeah, I'll drift away a little bit here, but just to make this insertion, this was in a Lancaster Archery Classic early 23. So back then I had been shooting for like 18 years, almost 17, 18 years. And so like, I don't mean to be arrogant, but when I go to a lecture, when I go hear somebody talk about archery, I'm not expecting anything groundbreaking because I guess I've seen a lot of it. But this lecture with Dick Tone, when he explained the principle behind it, to me, this was groundbreaking. I was like, whoa, I've never heard anything like this. And it makes sense and it's super interesting. So yeah, it was just kind of a shocker to me, but super interesting. And I think the principle behind it is super cool and interesting to get your take on this.
There was a movement back in the 80s. I think it was probably sort of USA centric, but there was a mindset of shooting called power archery. And I think Dick's method is pretty much based around that type of shooting, where it's the shot itself is very explosive and powerful and no hesitation in the shot. And you're relying on confidence and just completing the shot right through with no tentative movements. So the method of doing this power archery was a lot of blank target shooting and slowly progressing it onto the range without losing that explosive sort of shot making. If you watch Casey Koffold, she's probably as close as we've got on the line to that kind of shooting still. And it's obviously very successful for her, but quite different than a lot of, the Korean-centric or Korean-ish forms that we see around the world now, because it's not just Korea who shoots that way. Of course, it's spread throughout the world, but Casey's shooting is probably the closest I think you see to that sort of power archery of yesteryear. But it's interesting how those different types of shooting also tie in with the mentality of the athlete and how they go about shooting their shots under pressure and so on. And I think the great thing about the power archery method is I don't know that it necessarily shoots the huge scores in the ranking rounds, but it's reliable when the pressure's on and it's a do or die shot. And that's what we're talking about now, Olympics and matches coming down to one or two last arrows. So it has its place still, I think.
Definitely. And she is coached by Dick Tone, Casey Koffold, as far as I know. All right, so we digress. Let's go back to it. And we are kind of reaching the 1 hour mark. I told you, do you mind if we go a little bit extra?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, so, and I forgot to tell you that the build perfect archer thing, any of these aspects, it can be yourself. So don't be humble.
Okay. It won't be, but...
Next up is release.
It's really hard to go past Kim Woo-jin's release. Like that hand just moves back like this. He has this very almost hypnotizing aspect to his shot that you can watch and watch and watch, where he seems to not actually have any bow weight.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all know that many people shoot a lot of arrows, but more than anyone else, I think, on the line that I've seen in recent years, when he draws his bow, and I don't know what poundage he's using, I'm sure it's not low. Do you know what it is?
I'd guess it's around 50. I guess it's around 50.
Yeah, that was my guess. It doesn't even look like it's 30 pounds. It looks like it's nothing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And then on the release, though, given that there's 50 pounds there, the way his hand comes off the string also looks like it's not a result of a very heavy bow. It's quite a curious thing to watch, I feel. And I can never get enough of it. I just like watching it over and over because it has that very, very strange appearance of not drawing any weight at all. And you can only assume that that is from having shot so many arrows for years and years and years. And also, I would speculate the difference between someone who's come through that Korean system like him and has ended up where he is that it's very many arrows when they were young shooting quite low weights. So the endurance comes first and the control comes first, and then the weight creeps up. And I think that's the biggest trap that the spread of Korean coaches and people who follow that method, so it's not just the Korean coaches, but that have had when they go to other countries and are bringing that country's team up to speed, is that they go both for many arrows in training, but relatively heavy weight straight away. And I don't think you can do it that way, and not achieve the same effect anyway. So I suspect that, if you have not a history of shooting a lot of arrows, you never end up with that same look. Even if you shoot a lot now, the fact that you've gone to a heavy bow weight to be competitive straight away and then try and lift the arrow volume, it always leaves the archer with a look of tension, not relaxation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a fundamental difference between those two long-term approaches and the short-term approach. But yeah, I like his release. I think it's worth noting that in the last decade or decade and a half, the quality of releases across the World Cup scene, World Cup and up, there's very few bad releases on the line now. They're not all beautiful in terms of that sort of soft, silky look of Wu Jin's release, but there's very few poor releases. Back in my era, there were a few good releases and a lot of pretty ordinary ones that achieved a lot more in terms of performance than they looked like they should.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the understanding of what it is to make a good connected release has spread across the world at the top level much further than it was a few decades ago. I think that's probably explains why the depth at World Cup and World Championships and Olympic level is so much greater now, is that the understanding of shooting a connected shot is much more generally known.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Kim Woo-jin once again. Have you given him one of your tabs?
Yeah, I don't know if he's tried one of our tabs. It's always difficult to break into Korea because, of course, they manufacture a lot of equipment. I think if you could get any traction within Korea, you'd be having to work around perhaps some of the coaches and the manufacturing representatives in Korea. I think they've got it stitched up pretty tight.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see him try one. I think his technique would match the style of tab. It's got a very nice middle of the road kind of technique, which is what our tab, I think, fits very well with. There's no adjustment on it, so it doesn't fit everyone. And if you've got an archer that's got some sort of quirky, like really big hands or a real twist to their wrist or things like that, you can't adjust it to allow for that. But for all of the middle of the road types of archers, it works beautifully, and his technique, I think, would work well for him. But I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah. Well, I hope someday him or another prominent name in Korean archery. We'll see. I think it's a matter of time. Next one is mental toughness.
Yeah, that's a tough one, particularly because you never really know what's going on inside an archer's head. I think in the current lineup, I think probably Marcus. I feel like every shot, his focus is 100%. I think that's the strength in his shooting. His technique's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But I feel like he gets 100% of its potential out every arrow. And hats off to him for that, because focusing relentlessly like that is exhausting. And to do it at the highest level and manage to maintain good shot after good shot that is underpinned so much with mental focus, that's a real feat. It's one thing to have this technique that has been drilled into you, since you were 4 years old and you barely have to think about it. It's another to make it good. by sheer force of will. And I don't know Marcus's background. I don't know how long he's been shooting, but when I watch him shoot, I feel like it's, he's got his focus is like, a steel trap.
Yeah. And from training with him and competing with him also many times, it's impressive how easily he can switch it on and off. It's like, it's kind of, he's on the line, he switches it on. The moment he's off the line, it's like...
Well, and I guess that's the secret, isn't it? Because, and I think that's very valuable to be able to do that, because as you say, to be able to, if you're trying to be focused off the line as well for the entire day, it's exhausting. So yeah, being able to switch it on when you need it, that's a real skill.
Cool. Now, body balance or stance.
I think there's a lot of people who are pretty good at that these days, I think. If you look at Kim Woo-jin, he's got that funny little drop of his head as he releases, which is kind of fun to watch. But he's obviously very stable when he shoots. But I think if you ever watch like Marcus, when he releases, his attention doesn't waver, but nor does his head. His head and his eye focus doesn't move, which means he's very stable. And there was a French archer, Lionel Torres, back in around the 2000 mark, and he was very similar. And in fact, Kisikli often pointed to him and said, look at his holding his what Kisik used to call the triangle, the head and the two shoulders making a triangle, keeping that triangle still through the release, like really still, like amazingly still. And I think that's where the accuracy for those archers comes from, is not sort of falling off the back of the release that you see some archers do. And depending on when you start to collapse off the release, it can affect the consistency of the shooting. Whereas if you've got somebody who is very, their bow arms are very stable and very still, and their eye focus is still, and their head is still, and the release, maybe it's okay, maybe it's not, but everything forward of the release is immobile. That's where their accuracy is coming from, I think. So yeah, Marcus is very good at that. Kim Woo-jin's pretty good, I think. I mean, it has to be good. You wouldn't shoot the scores he does. Plugs in, but my wife's prompting me. Hang on. No, she's declining now. Marie Hrachkova, she similar to that, very still through the torso and the head, and staying focused through the release. Interestingly, I think a lot of the Korean ladies of recent teams there's been a little bit more of a jolt going through their frames as they release. They've sort of been focusing on that extremely snappy release. Or maybe not this year's team, but certainly previous teams in recent times. There's, that the speed of their releases have been so much quicker than everyone else. The only other person I can think of other than those Korean ladies that's got a release as fast as that is maybe Steve Weiler. His release, I don't know how he makes it so snappy.
Yeah.
And he's pretty still when he manages that too, like to have such a fast release and a stable body.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And I guess without being able to ask these individual archers as to how they are, what they're focusing on in terms of their expansion and which muscles are working, throughout the years, you've had all sorts of different ideas from coaches as to how you expand through the clicker, and then obviously how that affects the balance of the reaction of the release. There was a time where a lot of the Japanese coaches were like pushing the bow with their bow hand through the clicker, like expanding with that towards, people just using pulling their scapula together or pulling one scapula forward and the other one following it. All these different ideas about how you get that last 16th of an inch to come through the clicker, but it all affects the way that explosion of the release happens, and also the balance of left and right sides of your body as to what does what. Without knowing what the archer's doing, it's difficult to say what and why is happening.
So you've named some really interesting people. Super cool. Now follow through.
The follow through?
Yeah.
As I said, most archers now on the top level have pretty good follow throughs in general terms. I remember I really liked the way Okyo Moon from the which period was that? He had that lovely silky kind of, like his release would come straight back and then just softly drift up a bit. It always had
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And he is the coach for Australia now, isn't he?
I think he's not the head coach, but he's still involved. I think the New South Wales squad. I think he's managing them. New South Wales? No, maybe it's the anyway, ACT perhaps. But yeah, he's still involved, I think. But yeah, he's that follow through was always very nice to watch. I felt it's been a long time since I've seen it, but my memory was it was good. Kim Sunung, obviously, in that era, her release and follow through was showing the way where everybody needed to head towards. Really, the part that I'm most interested in when I see somebody shoot is that moment when the arrow is leaving their fingers. Like what happens well after that maybe describes what they're doing in terms of their approach. Like we were saying about, are they shifting the scapula or are they pushing their bow hand or whatever. But, that key point that dictates where the arrow is going to go and whether it's going to be the same as the previous arrow and whether it's going to be a good arrow is that moment that the string is leaving their fingers and whether they are still connected, whether the tension, their muscle tension is maintained while that is happening. It's amazing that you can see some archers at times lose that connection and still get a good outcome. Maybe that then opens the discussion about, is it the way they've got their gear set up that lessens the effect of that, or are they second guessing where the arrow is going to go? Like they've practiced, like their sight's set for a certain amount of loss of connection or something like that. And yeah, hard to know, but
yeah,
I'm always surprised when I see someone, you watch them go, oh, that shot wasn't so good, and it still ends up in a 10, and you think, how did that happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Last one on this, dealing with the wind.
Honestly, I think so many of the archers now are much better than my generation at picking the wind. And I'm looking forward actually to being able to talk to some of, if I get the opportunity in Paris to talk to some of the archers about how they've set up their gear, because, the consistency with which, certainly the matches we see on TV, the medal matches, the consistency that everybody at that level has of managing to keep the arrows in the 10 or mostly in the 10 when the weather is still not very kind is extraordinary. So
someone I heard from back then who was like a great wind shooter was one of the Russian ones. I think the president of the Russian Federation. What's his name?
Vladimir Shev.
Yeah, I think once I heard he was a great wind shooter.
So I only competed against him a few times. He sort of was finishing his career as I was beginning mine. But I do remember one of the things about his shooting was that he was one of those archers who had a very, very fast release, like super fast. And I also remember, I think there's a book that Rick McKinney wrote in which he was talking about Vladimir's technique. And he said he was one of those archers that was very good at, I think Rick's description was goosing them in. So, like he had very good feel for, as I think that people often describe it now as putting a bit of English on it. But I think it was probably more subtle than that, like just like feeling the shots in rather than doing a very prescribed motion. He was really attuned to how the shot was feeling at the moment that it was coming to its conclusion. As the arrow was leaving his fingers, he'd feel whether it was a bit one way or a bit the other, and just tweaking it a little bit, And I'm guessing shooting a bow that was probably quite twitchy in that sense. I think the bows have become a lot more heavily stabilized, I think, in recent times. It's much more normal in 2000 and before to have a bow that was not particularly heavily stabilized. Not a lot of weights on it, not a lot of, the side rods being quite a lot shorter and the bow being much more reactive and forward jumping. Whereas now everything seems to be damped down. And obviously for a reason. The scores have continued to climb, and not just at the top of the competition either. The middle of the pack, their scores are much higher than they used to be. So obviously it's for the best, but a different approach.
Yeah. All right. Now, last segment is some quick fire questions. Feel free to be super concise because we are already beyond what was planned. So feel free to be concise, and then we're done quickly. But also feel free to take your time because it's lovely to hear everything you've been saying. So, yeah.
And because, of course, you can edit it all out if it takes too long.
I'm just going to cut the blanks, but no. Last episode with Sergio Pagni was 1 hour and 40 minutes. So don't worry. Yeah. Okay. So What is your most memorable shoot-off?
Of my shooting or of watching somebody?
Your shooting.
My shooting. I guess the Sydney Olympics was the one that stands out most in my mind. Perhaps because I've had the benefit of being able to watch it as well. Like there wasn't many events that were recorded prior to Sydney. So, I guess Sydney Olympics.
The semi-final against Vice?
Well, I remember shooting that last arrow and thinking for a moment, that's it. That was a good arrow. I've won, and then realizing that it was actually dependent on Witz's last arrow as to whether he could match it or not. Yeah, that was a very good match too. That one. We seesawed back and forwards on that one.
Yeah. I've watched it. I mean, had watched a long time ago, and before our conversation, I watched it again, and yeah, it's nail biting. What's your favorite archery event in the world, current or past?
I shot a World Field Archery Championships in Norway in 1990, and it was the first World Field that I went to. I came second to Jay Bars there, and one of our guys came second in the bare bow, and one of our compounders came second. So we had a good result, but the place was amazing. I really loved. So funny that it's a field archery event, but like that was a really memorable event and trip. Such a beautiful place to shoot.
Cool. Sounds exciting. Your favorite bow of all time, the one that has a special place in your heart?
Probably the Axis that I shot in Sydney. That was a really different bow from everything that had come before. It was incredibly stable in the hand, had very soft limbs compared to a lot of the limbs that were before or after. It didn't stack, was really smooth to pull through the clicker. I didn't shoot a particularly heavy poundage in Sydney. It was only about 46 pounds on the fingers, but it just felt really quite beautiful to use. Funnily enough, I saw some people talking about the Radians, the very first Radian, which was the first machined riser that Hoyt did, and that was probably my least favourite. So they went from the Radian, which I really didn't like, to the Axis, which was really quite beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's your dream vacation destination?
I've only been to New Zealand for archery, and I would love to go back to New Zealand and have a look around as a tourist. Such a beautiful place, and not so far from here, at least. Kind of like going to what I used to imagine Switzerland was like, but without all of the people. I went to Switzerland when I was younger, thinking that it would be like the postcards, and then realised actually it's in the middle of a very densely populated continent. Whereas you go somewhere like New Zealand, and it's a lot less people and very beautiful. And I'd also like to go back to Scandinavia. I think that would be. I know my wife would really like to go and visit that. She wants to see the Northern Lights, so that's on our bucket list. At some stage, have to get there and see that.
And do you have hobbies and pets? I already saw earlier the cat, but
yeah, we have a couple of cats that are sphynx cats, so the hairless ones. They spend most of their days in front of our wood fire because it's cold at the moment. But even in summer, I think they would do it. They love it. They love it when it's hot. And they're a lot of fun. Hobbies, I like riding motorcycles. I have a couple of motorcycles, and it's something I came to late in life, so I'm not especially good at it, but I really like it. What else? I used to enjoy, as I said, wood carving.
mm-hmm.
And when I get too old to do what I'm doing now and have plenty of time, I'll probably go back to doing a bit of that. That's really relaxing and a lot of fun. Little ones, little carvings, little micro carvings. There's lots of detail. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we had a guy in our archery club back in Brazil that he did these little wood carvings, and it's so beautiful. It's so nice.
Yeah, we had, when I was at university doing the jewellery design course, we had a woman who was an expert in carving netsuke, which are the Japanese kimonos don't have pockets. And so the way, in a certain period of Japanese history, the way particularly the noble people, but I guess anybody carried personal effects was to have little bags or little boxes that they would attach with this netsuke, which was a bead on the end of the cord from the bag or the box that got pushed up underneath the sash of the kimono. You push it up underneath and the bead would stop it coming out. And they could be very simple things, just a very simple bead, or they could be amazingly detailed or beautifully worked sculptures or lacquer work, or all sorts of amazing crafts. And so this woman made netsuke that were carved in boxwood, as I was talking about before, and incredible things. Quite fascinating to look at and to touch. These beautiful little things. So maybe one day, if my eyes are still working.
They will be.
I hope so.
Yeah. Movie and or book recommendation, can be archery related or not.
Movies, that's always a hard one, isn't it? But I do like the original Blade Runner movie.
Uh-huh.
It's a bit of a classic, I'm sure, in lots of people's books.
Mm-hmm. And do you like the new one?
Less so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was probably a better made movie in some ways. Certainly the special effects, I'm sure, were better. But the original one, when I was younger, one of my favourite movies was Highlander. And I see now that they're about to remake it. It was funny, I saw some of the original Highlander movie probably within the last year. It's awful. I can't believe I used to love it. It was so corny and so badly made. But I thought it was fabulous when I was younger. So I hope the new one's better. Awful. Books. There was a book, a friend of mine from my late teens, and I we read it and we loved talking about it, called The Many-Coloured Land, which was a fantasy series that was focused on, the premise was people from the future, from now, going back in time to not Jurassic, but the Pliocene or something like that, as an exile. Like you could either go to prison, or you could get exiled, or just choose to go if you wanted to. But it was a one-way thing. You couldn't come back. So, and when these people went back there, they found that there was two races of aliens living on the planet that already were running the show. The other spin on the scenario was that both these alien races and also some of the people who went back in time had metaphysical powers. So there was all these different sets amongst the population as to whether they were healers or creators or coercers and stuff like that. And it was at the time a really interesting concept, I think. That sort of science fiction's been done to death pretty much, but at the time it was quite captivating, and the thought that we could do more with our minds than we currently think we can was a pretty entertaining thought for someone who was trying to focus on doing more with your focus than you previously had with archery. It sort of fit in with that a bit, I guess. Anyway, it was pretty entertaining when I read it as a teenager. I don't know whether I would enjoy it now, but I don't read a lot now. I don't really get the time or the inclination to read books. Perhaps that's something I should get back to.
And who's the author of this book?
I want to say it's Julian May, I think. Many-Coloured Land. I think it's Julian May.
Yeah, that sounds really original, the plot, to say the least.
Yeah, I feel like it was a fascinating story.
Lastly, a song, and why?
A song? I don't know if I can pick one. My likes are swinging strangely as I get older, back into older music and even things that border on a bit of country, which I find really peculiar, because the one genre I hated as a young person was country music. I could listen to anything except country. And now I find that the stuff, maybe it's because of all the hipster movement that happened, a few years ago, that everything sort of morphed into sort of semi-folk, semi-country kind of sounding stuff. I guess the main thing is I like stuff that's a bit more mellow now. I don't like it loud, and I don't like it, and I don't like pop music. So I can't listen to the radio ever. Hate it. Yeah.
I guess INXS, they're Australians.
Yeah,
right?
it was too poppy for me. I don't really like the mainstream sort of music.
Yeah, without realizing, I quite like some songs by some Australian groups or and artists. Also, The ones who sing Burning Beds.
Midnight Oil, yeah.
Yeah, Midnight Oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a place for that. I occasionally pull up some old stuff like that. Yeah, all these, the streaming music apps make it a lot easier now to,
Yeah.
just, like when I moved house 10 years or so, and I just got rid of all of my CDs, all these CDs you spend so long saving up
Yeah.
for as a younger person. You think, oh, I'll keep these forever. And then eventually you think, what for? Like,
Yeah.
for, a few dollars a month, I can listen to anything wherever I want it, so, and the nice thing about that is you can, suddenly think, Dire Straits, they were a good band. Let's listen to a bit of Dire Straits, and, have a night of listening to Dire Straits. You might not listen to it again for months and months and months, and you can be a lot more eclectic. I feel like the music from sort of the Dire Straits and that sort of Pink Floyd and that kind of era was a lot more complicated music. Like the stuff now seems so oversimplified. I feel like it's sort of like
Bland.
lazy. Like just like it's not like the sweet spot for real creative music making seemed to have been in years gone. I think like the stuff now. It's just,
and it's interesting you mentioned both Pink Floyd and Dire Straits, and they're both bands that had a couple of like 8-minute long, 10-minute long, or even longer songs, and we don't see any of this anymore, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they were making stuff because it was art, not because it's a lifestyle or a product.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was a product. I mean, I'm sure their managers saw it as product, but I feel like that very creative period where they were really extending themselves, particularly when you consider what came before, which is to say there weren't, when Pink Floyd came along, there wasn't Pink Floyd to base their music on. They created that stuff. I don't feel like what's being produced now is actually moving forward. It's just sort of mashing stuff up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like a lot of the old stuff and some of the new ones.
Shows I'm getting old, doesn't it?
I tell everyone that
every old person ever said stuff like this.
But I tell everyone I was born in the wrong year. Like I should have been born in the 60s or something, because the stuff I like to listen to, they're pretty old.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to feel the same thing I had a few old sports cars when I was in my early 20s, and I used to play Rolling Stones and stuff like that in it just for the ambience, because it's it fit, and it was much more interesting than the stuff that was being made at the time. Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Good to know. But well, we've come to the end of it. I feel we could go on for much longer. I really, really enjoyed it all. I really appreciate your time, your availability, and it was a real pleasure to talk to you more, get to know how everything played out for you, how you see things. I think you've got such an interesting take on so many topics about our sport, and makes me feel very happy that we have someone like you in our sport, and you're going to be there in Paris. So super cool. Really huge thanks. Thank you so much, Simon. It was a pleasure. Thank you, and all the best in Paris.
Thanks very much. It's been fun.
Yeah, all the best in Canada as well for the Field World Championship.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot, and I'll see you around. Conversations like this one are exactly what I wanted when I first thought about this podcast project. I wanted to put flesh on the bones, to talk to the people behind the bow. Simon is a very talented and successful archer. You can just look at the numbers, at the results, and you will reach that conclusion. But a deeper conversation, getting to know the way he sees things, his thought process, the experiences that made him the person he is, I think that's really fascinating. It's funny because over the years, I've had beginner or amateur archers talk to me and ask me questions that almost made it look like I was perfect, and I'm not. They thought I didn't have any insecurities or struggles, but I guess the difference between their level and mine made them feel that way. On the other hand, I felt like this many times myself about the archers who are at the very top. And to hear Simon talk about his own insecurities, about how at many competitions, including the Sydney Olympics, above all else, he just didn't want to be eliminated early. About how with every match victory, the potential disappointment got smaller and therefore it just got easier. I've felt like this myself in so many competitions. And to see an Olympic champion say he felt that way, well, I believe it just makes us all realize that he's human. We all are. But somehow we tend to forget that sometimes. Lastly, it was pure delight listening to everything he said. I think he can describe things in such a rich and colorful manner, while being able to see the essence of it all. I love the way he said that many times in practice we are, quote unquote, solving today's riddle. Putting together a good shot, a good technique, is definitely a riddle, and a daily one. You might solve it today, but tomorrow you're starting over. Thank you, Simon. I look forward to talking to you again soon. As always, feel free to reach out to me with suggestions, feedback, or questions you'd like to have answered here on the show, or to simply share cool stories. You can find the show's Instagram, X, YouTube, and email in the description. All the messages I get are really heartwarming. I really appreciate them all. If you like the show, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. So from me, it's bye for now. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. And until then, keep on shooting strong. This is the Shoot Off Archery Podcast. I'm Bernardo Oliveira. Thanks for listening.